Okay. So welcome to another AsyncAPI meeting. I'm not Łukasz Gornicki. So he's on holidays, and I have no idea what's on the agenda as usual. So let me just check. What is it? Oh, I see. Cool. So I see that, Gerald, you have something there. But as always, that's for those who have to leave the meeting early. If there's something that you want to bring on, like a question or something, feel free to ask now.
I'd certainly be interested to hear about the 2.1 release, what the current plan is, when will it be released, how is it going to be decided, or when is it going to be decided, what's part of that?
Good question. So we set up sometime next week, Łukasz and I, so we can work on this because we're both coming back to work. So I'm here now, but I'm not supposed to be here. I'm on a paternity leave, as you know. But next week I'm coming back to work, and he's coming back to work next week as well from holidays. So next week we're gonna work on this and decide everything. The plan is that there is no plan. We only know for now is that it's going to be this month. But since it's the first time, there's a lot of housekeeping tasks that we have to do, like automating all the stuff, and yeah. So until when are we accepting things into the spec, into this new release? Honestly, I cannot answer this question right now. I will say that, I mean, for us is until the very late moment that we decide that, okay, we're ready to release. Then if there's something already done at this point in time, we can merge it. But done means tested as well, right? So so I guess, yeah, there's I know that maybe you're asking because you have some pull requests there.
Yes, also, but not just that. No, I also didn't know what the process is, but now I know.
Yeah, we're defining the process, and since it's the first time we're experimenting and experiencing the process itself, and we're trying to housekeep the process, and yeah, we'll make it better on the next release for sure, and we'll keep improving over releases, and yeah, so that's all I can say for now.
And after that, 2.2, is there a release cadence now, or is it whenever enough has accumulated?
There is a release cadence. There is the next one is in September, and can't remember. There's an issue. Let me just find it.
Okay, well, September is quite soon. No, it's
yes, especially that we have summer in the middle. It's quite soon, yeah. Let me find the issue. Here it is. So there it is. And the final decision was, since nobody argued against it, is June, September, January, April, and repeat. June, September, January, April. So it's always the same. And so September, we don't know if it's going to be 2.2 or if it's going to be 3.0. It all depends on the content of the release, right? So whatever is merged, it's going to be deciding the number of the release.
Sure.
I was going to try to push for 3.0 myself, so we can get rid of this publish and subscribe confusion stuff and reusing channels and everything. But yeah, it's pretty soon. It's summer in the middle, so I'm not sure I should be doing that. but yeah, January seems far. So it's like it's almost like one more month, one more year, with this publish subscribe thing. So maybe we should be brave there and try to fix it for September. I don't know. This is something we have to decide. But yeah. Is there anything else? By the way, the agenda is here for those who don't know. I'm looking at it. Okay, so I think, Gerald, you maybe want to.
Yes. So let's make this a discussion. No, it's not that I've prepared a speech and and will argue my case, but I just want to explain what I went through, and maybe we can establish some common understanding. So I was writing the binding specification for the AnyPointMQ message broker, MuleSoft's message broker. And in doing that, I tried to understand the other binding specifications and learn from them and follow their approach. And there's something that I don't quite get in how messages are defined and message binding definitions are made. Maybe if I share my screen, but the host has disabled screen sharing. That looks better, yes. Right. Can you see my screen? Yes, good. So let's start with the basics, and please let me know if I'm on the right page here. So this is the standard spec 200 on the message object, and where I'm coming from is I think that someone who reads an AsyncAPI document should know essentially what a message looks like that he will send or receive, what head it will have, what payload it will have, etc. So when I see something like content type here, which is a string, then to me that says that an AsyncAPI document like that one, no, which defines message to be content type application JSON, that's part of the contract. So every message exchanged through that channel is a JSON message. This is not an example, no, it's part of the contract. There are only JSON messages supported. Are we in agreement on that?
Well, I would say yes, but there's something that we're lacking in the spec, and is specifying which ones are like part of a contract or should be like understood as a contract, and which ones are informative. So like, for instance, description and summary and title are informative. They're not part of the contract.
Agreed.
And so yeah, I will say that's part of the contract, but to be honest, some people might think that this should not be part of the contract because it depends on what you have on headers, on the protocol binding headers, right? So
I see. Okay, yeah, that's an interesting take on it. Yes.
Yes. So maybe we should be cleaning that out, like or specifying that out, like we need to make it clear, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's certainly one point. Yeah. So, but to continue along these lines, then, assuming that, for instance, content type is part of the contract, then it is fixed to that value here in the AsyncAPI document. Whereas for headers and payload, and I'm assuming now for payload that we actually do specify schema object, the contract is the schema. No? So for instance, this here says that messages to or from that channel have a header that has a property application instance ID. And I think that's optional. So in fact, any single message can have an application instance ID application header. And so what we have done here with application instance ID, my instance ID, that is just an example. No? The contract is the name and type of this header. And I think we're in agreement on that, aren't we? Yeah. So let's move on then to binding objects, because this is where I came from. So I looked at, for instance, this one. This is the AMQP. It's the operation binding object, but I think the argument is the same. No? That binding object defines user ID as a string, or reply to as a string. So when I see a async API document like this one, this says to me that the user ID is fixed to string, to guest. Every message must have guest or none, I suppose. No, but it's not that message one can have a different user ID than message two, because this is fixed to string, just like content type in the other example was fixed to string. What do you make of that?
So yeah, let me just try to find something. You're right, and actually, I changed it on the Kafka binding, but not on the AsyncAPI binding. So if you look at it here, the link I'm sharing, you will find that group ID, client ID on the operation binding or on the message binding.
Yeah.
You'll find that key, for instance, is not fixed. It's a schema object. It's a JSON schema object.
Right.
So there you can make it fixed by enumerating a single value, like in the example of key there, that it can only be my key. But if you want, you could make it multiple values, a pattern or something, right? To match a pattern or something.
Got it. So you're saying essentially that this binding definition is not a good one.
It's not a good one. Yeah, exactly. It happened to me while I was working with Kafka, and that's why I changed it. Like, oh, this fixed value is not very powerful. It should probably be a schema object. I also thought of making it like either a string or a schema object, so you could make it fixed easily. But then, you know, like making things to have like multiple types. Can't remember the word of this.
Right.
So like making things have multiple types can be sometimes confusing. So that's why I decided on the Kafka binding to make it only schema object, and which is a JSON schema. And with that, you could just specify either with enum or with const, which is another JSON schema keyword. You could make it just a fixed value.
Okay. Okay.
If that's the case,
Good.
but you still have the ability to make it more complex, right? So I think we should be updating the AsyncAPI binding probably.
Right. So we are in agreement there. That's also the lesson I took away from looking at this. I think this is just a bad example of a binding specification. And in fact, there are others which take the approach that you just mentioned for Kafka, for instance. That's the HTTP binding, where headers are a schema object.
So this is the HTTP.
Yeah. So for instance, in that particular case, for a message, you can say headers are content type. And it can only be JSON. I think that's exactly what we just had for Kafka. No?
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, on the in the case of HTTP, not sure on the message level. but I think we should be, or I'm gonna be proposing next that we use OpenAPI definitions to as a binding, right? So not the whole file, but just the path item object on OpenAPI, which is the one that defines get, put, post, right? So actually, no, the path item is like for us channel, for them is path. So yeah, so you can have multiple operations there, like get, put, post, blah blah blah. Right? So we don't have to define it ourselves, and we already have a lot of tooling available, and we integrate even more with OpenAPI, right? So
okay,
so,
but my question is not really about HTTP specifically, but just about the different ways of defining these message binding objects. No, HTTP, this one particularly here, like Kafka, no, it takes the schema object approach for headers, which I think is much better than the other approach, as we just saw for AsyncAPI. But it still has a problem, I think, and the problem is that every AsyncAPI document will come up with the same properties here, no? Because they are these are protocol headers, no? They are always the same, more or less. And so my question is, if I write message binding objects for different protocols, HTTP, JMS, any point in queue in my case, I will have a fixed list for a particular version of these properties for protocol headers. Question is, do we want to somehow allow the binding specification to contribute such a schema object? Basically, the binding specification has the schema object for the protocol headers, and then every AsyncAPI document can just refer to that because it knows they are correct.
So you mean like having a set of predefined headers?
That's what it comes down to, no? Because what we see here is my AsyncAPI document, but your AsyncAPI document will in all likelihood have the same sections here and others, no, for the cache control headers and things like that. No? So this can get quite extensive. If this schema object here were part of the binding specification, then your and my AsyncAPI document could just refer to that schema object, and it's the end of story.
So in the end, what you're advocating here is for reusability. You want to make it easier to reuse this chunk of definition. Is that what you're?
That is one part of my argument. It continues from here, no? But that's the first step. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, I'm all for it. Like, if you can summarize this on an issue, and I'm happy to review it. And I think it makes total sense. Think about one thing, but for those who are new to the project as well. The binding slant is pretty new, as you can see. The versions are 0.1.0, so this is like pretty much experimental, and it hasn't been touched for a year, some of them, or more than a year. So feel free to iterate there, to keep proposing there, and let's work on it.
But I'm not. Well, I can't promise that I will be able to make that recommendation as a PR, no. But
no worries.
But I just wanted to clarify whether that is a goal at all, no. And then secondly, it's a generic topic, no. It's not just for the HTTP binding, because every protocol will have protocol headers.
Yep. So feel free to open the issue, and even if you don't have time, someone else can champion it. So no worries. You don't have to champion everything you propose. We understand people have limited times. So yeah, and actually I'll be happy to champion it at some point whenever I have time.
Okay.
So yeah,
but do you see the value in that? Do you see the value?
Yeah, for me, of course. I mean, it's already happening somehow on the Kafka binding, and it started happening here in the HTTP, but not quite yet. And but still, reusability needs to be addressed, and we definitely have to do something here.
I see.
Yeah. The thing with HTTP, for instance, the reason I did it as a schema object, the whole headers as a schema object, is that it can contain any header name, right? You can write any header name there. Not all protocols define that, or not all of them allows you to put any kind of header name. But here in the case of HTTP, this is pretty much open. Like you can send any headers you want, as long as the client understands it. Right?
Yes, but I think part of my argument is that how do I know that it's this field here for that binding object that specifies the protocol headers? I mean, as a human being, I know, but the tool might not know. So the question is, should the spec define a standard way for a message binding object to contribute protocol headers? For instance, by saying they must be defined in a field called headers, and it must be a schema object. And the default schema object can be found here.
Not sure. I see the value of what you're saying, but isn't it like too early for us to make a compromise here? Like that it's always going to be a headers field on every message binding object, or in every binding object. I don't know. Maybe it's.
Well, let's maybe take the next two steps and see if that changes anything. So I think for HTTP we're clear. No, there are always headers, and there's always content type amongst the headers. So I'll submit an issue that describes.
Yeah, I think it's the best way, because we're just a few here in the call, but I'm sure that others will have ideas as well. So the best ways to summarize it it's fine that we discuss it here, but let's not take decisions here on the meetings.
I see. Okay. So
Good. Others can also chime in.
So to give another example of a message binding object, that's the one for IBM MQ. And it defines headers as a string, which is a comma-separated list. Yeah? I don't know IBM MQ sufficiently to know how that is used, but it's a similar but different approach. So I think it just shows that these binding objects, they all look very different. So a bit of guidance how they should be defined would be helpful, I think.
I think Dale is on the call. Maybe he can clarify. I honestly don't know IBM MQ myself either. So.
It's been a while since I've used it as well, to be honest. But I'll point Rich Coppin at the issue and see if he can add something, because yeah, I'm curious what he was thinking of that as well.
And so that brings me to a concrete example, and that's the second step in my confusion. This is the correlationId example from the spec. And it defines a message object here, yeah, which has a name, and it uses this correlationId field in the standard message object without actually referring to a binding at this stage. Yeah. But it says the location of the correlationId is message headers MQMD correlId, and that works because
probably in the payload. No, payload.
I'm looking for headers, but I don't think there are headers defined here.
I don't think there are headers here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know MQTT enough, but I think MQMD only works because this is an MQTT server.
Not sure, but just take something into account, like whenever, so whenever there are not headers defined, it doesn't mean that there cannot be headers, right? It's just that they're not defined here, right? So that means that on runtime, you should look on the message headers, MQMD/correlID. You know what I mean? So
I see. Yes.
so it doesn't mean that you cannot have headers. It's just that they're not defined here.
I see.
You know.
So I have two problems with that here. Problem one is it desirable that the message definition without the binding ties this down to MQTT, to a protocol? I thought everything protocol specific should be in the binding.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's a bad example. Yeah. Yeah, it's probably not a good example of what you should be doing. It's definitely valid example. You could do it, but it's definitely not the best example, since you're tying everything to a specific protocol, like you said.
But I wouldn't know how to do it differently, no? If in MQTT headers are under the MQMD folder, I think they call it.
I mean, yeah, the other I would say the other way to do it is to put this correlation ID information on the bindings.
That was my thinking, yeah.
But yeah, honestly, like our effort here was we were trying to unify the correlation ID information that you can find in many protocols into the trunk specification, into the core specification.
Okay.
But I see that because when you find this correlation ID information on the bindings, it has no meaning. Usually it has no meaning. It's just another header. But if you put it here, it has semantics, right? Which is like, okay, so this value is for correlation IDs. They're found in headers, but it's a specific header with a specific name, and it has a meaning, right? It's a correlation ID.
Which I think is very good, no? But the alternative would be that the message binding object contributes what is the correlation ID for this particular protocol. Where is it to be found?
Yes, I agree. So this one is going to be a tough one, because that will mean removing something.
And the second part of my issue is this. For any point MQ, there's a distinction between protocol headers and application headers. Mm-hmm. They are not the same, no? For GMS, for instance, I think I can get every header, for HTTP, definitely, I can get every header through the same API call. For any point MQ, I must know, am I looking up a protocol header or an application header? But from this syntax here, I can't see whether correlID is a protocol header or an application header.
You're right.
And the question is, should it be a goal that this is explicit? No, for instance, for GMS, correlation ID is part of the GMS spec. It will always be a protocol header. For HTTP, it will always be an application header, because HTTP has no standard header for correlation ID.
Mm-hmm. Have no opinion here, to be honest. Like, there's a lot of cases. There are a lot of cases to consider here. In the, like you say, the case of HTTP, there's no special header for correlation IDs. It all depends on the product or that you're using, right? Or you can define your own name. For other protocols like MQMD, it's a specific one. I don't even think, like, and for others, for instance, like WebSockets, you don't even have headers. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's something that, I mean, I have no opinion here. I think this is this is a subject that we should study more in depth, like how we can make this more, let's say, reusable or compatible across protocols.
But my thinking, at least, is it's not a simple misunderstanding of how these things are written. You agree that there's something there that's not quite tied down yet.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll submit probably 3 issues out of that for these 3 topics, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Good.
I think it's the best idea, definitely, because and maybe and always do it, even if so don't wait for the calls to ask if you should submit issues or not, because maybe during the call some of us we're not understanding your point or something, and then we may confuse you a little bit more. So I think it's always better to write down an issue and then and then have the discussion there, because it's easy that during the call we could even confuse you more, and then we tell you like, no, don't write down an issue for that, and it turns out that there's a problem there, and it should be done, it should be addressed. So yeah, always go for the issue first. I think it's better, and then on the call we can discuss the issues. I think it always works best, because then people can also prepare and read the issue before the call, and I think it's always best. But I mean, it's fine either way. But
yeah.
But
well, I have opened that issue yesterday, but it kind of confuses the three topics. Okay. It just became a bit clearer in my mind overnight. But now that we've talked it through, I think I can separate the 3 issues and submit separate ones for that.
So that's like looking forward to our like multi-protocol and also multi-spec, if you want, future. We need to clean these things out, right? Like we need to make these things easier to grasp and less confusing, for sure. So if we're gonna introduce the usage of OpenAPI as an HTTP binding, or GraphQL as well as a binding in the future, or other specs and multi-protocol, then these little things need to be clear. And maybe the way is to make a core spec lighter and then put more pressure on the binding side.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, if we think that there's something in common between all the bindings and it's getting repeated across all the bindings, then we may incorporate it to the core spec and remove it from the bindings. But yeah, right now there's a mess here. There's a mess. There is a mix of things that we need to clean out, for sure. So yeah.
Let's say it's a bit blurry. I wouldn't say it's a mess.
Yeah, right now it's not a mess, but it's a little bit like this thing here is not really clear. So yeah. It's the result of just one guy working on the spec. That's what happens when
no more. That's no longer the case.
Not anymore, luckily. But yeah, that's a result of this one guy doing all the work, and so you go faster, but you can't go farther. So and you commit more mistakes because nobody's reviewing your work. So yeah, definitely we should review this together and work on this together. So yeah, I'm happy that you spot these issues. That's good.
Great.
That's it. So, is there anything else, Gerald? Maybe.
Not from me, no.
Anyone else? Nobody wants to say how much you miss Lucas for him when he watched the recording. No, you don't miss him.
We are shy now.
I'm disappointed. With all the hard work that he's doing, you don't miss him. Too bad.
But maybe just one point. I mean, that release that is coming out,
Mm-hmm.
I understand this not just as a release of the spec, but of all the tooling in sync with the spec. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, one of the things to make your proposal be ready on the last stage, or stage 3, I think it is. One of the requirements is that you implement it on the JavaScript parser. You implement support for it on the JavaScript parser, which is no worries, because I've seen your proposals, and it's probably just you probably don't have to do anything on the JavaScript parser, only on the JSON schema definition, because it's just adding another binding, right? So I don't think you have to do. I think Dale added some things. Yeah, he added some things on the JSON schema file, and then went to the JavaScript parser and updated to point to the new JSON schema file defining the spec. So that's all you have to do, probably, nothing else. And if you can't do it, we can do it for you. So we can help you do it. So it's fine. But for more, let's say, complex issues, then you probably have to implement it on the JavaScript parser. And that's, I mean, or if you can't, just say it loud, right? Like it's just,
No, it's
no,
it's fine. I can do Java. I'm a developer after all. I just hate JavaScript. That's all. But I will swallow my pride and write JavaScript.
But that's totally fine. If I mean, hating JavaScript, it's also a valid reason if you want. So you can just say like, hey, I'm not gonna swallow my pride. You write the JavaScript part, and someone else will love JavaScript and will love to write this part. So yeah, just it might take some more time because you have to find someone.
You will let me know on the issue when it's time to write the JavaScript, so that I know.
It's on the contribution guide. It's on the, I think one of the steps. Let me just find it. One of the stages requires it to be implemented on the contributing. Let's see here. Yeah, so draft. I think it's draft. Stage 2.
Stage 2. I see.
Yeah, stage 2 requires implementation on the JavaScript parser and the JSON schema.
Okay. Okay.
They don't have to be merged. Yeah, it's like they don't have to be merged. Just pull request there, right? Okay. And then for accepted, they don't have to be merged, but they have to be ready to be merged.
Okay.
Ready to merge.
Because I have another PR pending as well, which is about assigning channels to servers. Where for a channel you can say it doesn't apply to all the servers. It just applies to 1, 2, and 3.
That might require something on the parser, like saying like getting all the channels for a specific server or things like this. You know, like or all the servers for a specific channel. Yeah.
Okay. I'll watch out for that. I don't want to hijack the meeting.
So this is the contribution guide for those watching. It's on the chat. So for those watching the recording, it's in the chat dump. Anything else? No.
The JSON schema work is done, isn't it? I mean, I saw all of that merged. So every binding object now has JSON schemata, and they are enforced by the parser.
I have no idea. Maciek, maybe you know about it. or Jonas, because I've been out and I'm not following everything.
That specific thing, I don't know.
Okay. The JSON schema that have been merged into the binding spec project, into the master branch. So that PR with all the JSON schema objects that has been merged. So I thought that's the end of the story, but I don't know.
I mean, the only thing that's missing now is to actually validate it in the parser, in the tooling. I don't think it's used anywhere.
Ah, I see. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Where is it? I'm totally lost right now.
The last merge into the master branch on the bindings project.
Yes.
Added basically 3 or 4 JSON schema objects for every binding specification.
I sent a link in chat to the commit.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I can't find it. Oh, nice. Oh, so it's in each folder, let's say in each directory, you have a JSON schema. Cool. That's cool.
And we're probably missing to update the what's it called? Like the main async API JSON schema definition to actually include these documents. Pretty sure it's not used.
We have one, right? We have one, which is I think right now it's in the AsyncAPI node repo, which we need to probably rename. But we have one, which is this one in the chat. We have like the main spec is defined as JSON schema. It's not defining everything, because not everything is possible to be defined with JSON schema, right? But yeah, as much as we can is defined there.
As you can see on line 754, we're still missing to add the references to each of the bindings. So they're actually used.
Yes, exactly. So they are empty objects. This means like it can be anything.
Yeah.
And which is funny. Now I know it can be true instead of empty objects. That will work as well. So yeah, we need to put there, probably link the definitions there, or maybe we should move all these definitions somewhere. I don't know.
But I think that better will be add the links inside the code in the parsing time. I mean, because you can use another version of the binding, yeah?
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it means that we must check in the parser that you use the appropriate version of the binding and then make inside the code the reference.
Yes,
For the
you're right.
exactly.
Can we just use one?
Yeah, because the main reason to decouple the spec with the bindings is that bindings need to have another release cycle, right? We need to iterate faster on the bindings than in the spec. So, and if we reference it from the spec, if we reference them from there, then we're coupling them. And as soon as we change it on the main spec, we need to make a new release in the core spec. So they need to be decoupled probably. They need to keep being like this. And it's at code level where you specify which binding you're going to use, right?
Yeah.
Which is not at code level. It's on you define the version on your document, right? That's why we have the binding version field on the bindings, right?
Yeah, but at runtime, the parser must read the binding version or default it to latest and then look
Yeah,
up the
exactly.
correct JSON scheme.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Lookup, or it will be already included on the parser. Right? It will be bundled with the parser, so it doesn't have to make a call to an external URL or anything. Yeah. And that will also allow us to optimize the parser as well. So you only include those bindings that you're going to use, right? You don't have to include every binding. Most people are just going to use 1 or 2 bindings, not more. So yeah. Cool. Thanks for
We have
pointing
an
out.
issue for it.
Yeah, I created for that in the parser, as I remember, or in the specification. I don't. Yeah. But I also described this problem for the parser.js.
Yeah, but it was more if we had it in the parser repo. Because I don't think we have.
No, I also can't find it.
Okay, I will create that. Don't worry.
No, can't find it. If it's not there, I mean, feel free to create it, and or if you find it, Maciek.
No, we
Just,
have only in the specification. I will create in
Okay.
the parser.js. Yeah, don't worry.
Okay. Oh, you found it on the spec.
Yeah.
Cool. That's cool. Oh man, I'm missing a lot of issues. The number of issues that you folks create and pull requests per day is overwhelming sometimes. when this project was getting started, I was like following everything, and I had time for that. And now I just spend like 2 or 3 days out and come back, and it's like, damn, it's impossible to follow. It's like I'm not even trying anymore. It's like as soon as there's something important, they will ping me, and that's fine. That's it. That's it. I rely on you. Completely rely on you. It's like you folks know what you're doing. So yeah. And now you see, I haven't seen this. It's cool.
Should we close the issue in the spec? Isn't it?
Uh,
I mean, it's kind of done, but it depends on.
No, I don't think so. We can treat it as the epic for the specification, for parser, etc.
I guess.
As you wish. I honestly have no context here, so don't know what to suggest. I first will have to read it. So yeah.
But yeah, we can do that.
Cool, folks. Is there anything else? No. Okay, so thanks for joining once again, and I hope this has been productive. And yeah, let's keep chatting on Slack. See you in 2 weeks.
See you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.